Hello, welcome back to Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley on YouTube. I'm Pastor Charmley. I'm here in the bookshop to talk about the book. That is to say, to talk about the Bible, or in particular, one translation of the Bible. The Bible, of course, was originally written in ancient languages, in Hebrew, a little bit in Aramaic, and in Greek. The Old Testament is mostly Hebrew, a bit of Aramaic. The New Testament is all in Greek. But it was written, not that it might stay in those languages, but it might be translated. Ever since the beginnings of the church, we recognise that God has given us the Bible to be translated into every language. There have been occasions where that's been forgotten, but the church has emphasised the importance of Bible translation, even to the point where we recognise that a translation of the Bible is the Bible. So here I am in the bookshop talking about the greatest English Bible translation ever, the King James Bible, the Authorized version, first published in 1611. It had a bit of a struggle to get established initially, but from the end of the 17th century through to the end of the 19th century, it was the English Bible. And it's not hard to see why. It is one of the best translations of any book that's ever been produced. Translation is an art, it's not a science. Now, I've studied 3 languages other than English: Greek, Hebrew, and French at secondary school. I'm not a linguist. My abilities with languages, not very good. But I'm able enough, in terms of having studied other languages, to know that different languages work differently. So that a translator has a very difficult task, because the translator's task, can be put very simply. It is to take the original text and to put it into the receptor language as faithfully as possible, which sounds simple. The trouble is that different languages work differently. Different languages, you put different bits of a sentence in different places, or they can move around depending on how the language works. Some languages involve complicated use of different verbs and nouns and so on, and prefixes and suffixes. Others don't. But in order then to reproduce, the use of those prefixes and suffixes and verb forms involves having more words in your sentence. Well, the King James was commissioned in 1604 by King James I of England. He had been, since the tender age of 1 year old, he had been the King of Scotland. But of course, before he reached his majority, his manhood, then somebody else, others ruled for him. And James came to England with high hopes. First of all, he had high hopes that in England he'd have more authority than he did in Scotland. Secondly, he had high hopes that he would be able to unite the whole island of Great Britain, Scotland and England. Of course, England also rules Wales. He wanted a united kingdom. He didn't get it. He got 2 kingdoms united in him. He wanted a currency union, didn't get that either. But he did get a common Bible. Elizabeth had lived too long. Elizabeth I, we think of her, we quite rightly think of her as this great monarch who established England as a Protestant nation over and against her Roman Catholic half-sister Mary. Elizabeth wanted to go back to the settlement under her brother Edward. The thing was, of course, that in going back, this also meant stopping the process of reform where it had been when Edward died. And there were some Protestants in the Church of England who didn't agree with that. They said, no, the church needs to be purified, and so they came to be known as the Puritans, and they were persecuted. Elizabeth also wasn't a great believer in preaching. which was very different from Edward. Edward was a great believer in preaching. It's notable if you go around, as I have, the old parish churches of England, most of the really old pulpits are Jacobean. They come from the reign of James I, because James was in favour of preaching. Well, when James came south, the Puritans presented him with a petition called the Millenary Petition. See if I can get my mount my tongue around that. Millenary Petition. And it's so called because it was supposed to be signed by 1,000 ministers. And this called for further reform of the church, including a reform of the function of the bishops. James, on the other hand, had a very definite view that the bishops were important. He had a saying, no bishop, no king, that authority in the church, as in the state, should be top down, not bottom up. But nevertheless, he summoned a conference at Hampton Court Palace in 1604 with representatives of the Puritans and with certain bishops. But he made sure to get very, very moderate Puritans. Nevertheless, he proceeded to roundly insult both parties, to tell the Puritans, who were moderates and actually quite in favour of a modified episcopacy, that a Scottish presbytery agrees as well with monarchy as the devil does with God. And then when the bishops said, words to the effect, well, for 40 years we've had the same settlement, James said, well, if a man's been sick with the pox for 40 years, does that mean he shouldn't seek a cure? And so after insulting both parties, James basically declared himself to be more on the bishop's side than the Puritan side. But the Puritans had suggested, we need to have one English Bible. What they'd have said today, with the huge variety of English Bibles on the market, I don't know, they'd be horrified. I do know that much. What did they want? Well, probably actually what they wanted was for the Geneva Bible, which was the Puritan Bible, to be the standard. But James didn't like the Geneva. Got over here, let's reach it over. This is a modern reprint of the Geneva Bible in a modern typeface. And the Geneva Bible was the Puritan Bible. It was produced in Geneva, John Calvin's city. It was produced by English exiles who had come over because of persecution in the days of Mary. And the Geneva Bible is an amazing achievement. It's really the first English Bible to be translated completely from the original languages. And it's very familiar in many ways. Genesis chapter 1, Geneva Bible. In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the waters. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light that it was good. And God separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and morning were the first day. And you can see immediately how similar it is to the Authorized version. On the other hand, there was an existing Authorized version in the Church of England. It was called the Bishop's Bible, because it was translated by bishops, and each of the bishops was responsible for a certain book or books. The Bishop's Bible was just not a good translation. It at times was overly pedantic, at times it was pretty much impenetrable. I mean, you have that wonderful phrase in Ecclesiastes, cast your bread upon the water and you shall find it after many days. And the Bishop's Bible rendered that, lay your bread upon wet faces, which is pretty much impenetrable in terms of English. It's bad English. So the Bishop's Bible needed to be replaced. The Geneva Bible had its excellencies, but the big problem as far as James was concerned is it had footnotes that seemed to undermine royal authority. James had a big thing about royal authority. He was the king, and he wanted everyone to know that he was the king. But this caused problems, because the Puritans had the view the king is subject to the law. James had a different view. And when we have the description, for example, of King Herod in Matthew, he's spoken of as a tyrant. Or again, the notes in Exodus chapter 1, which suggested that it was right and proper for the Hebrew midwives to disobey. Their disobedience herein was lawful. To disobey the king. Well, James would hold their disobedience was unlawful, even though their disobedience was to a wicked order. So he felt some of these notes were potentially subversive, and so he couldn't have them. So he commissioned a new Bible version to be translated by some of the greatest scholars in the kingdom, and they were a mixture of men. Some of them were Puritans, some of them were Anglicans, some of them were Arminians, most of them were Calvinists. All of them were Anglicans, of course. It's very important. It was an Anglican translation. One of them was of mixed Spanish and Flemish descent. Another was an Englishman born in Holland. Some of them were great advocates of episcopacy, others were opposed to episcopacy. The Authorized version is a very conservative translation. James insisted that certain words such as bishop and church were to be used, and baptism. He insisted that it was to be conservative. But that's part of the genius of the Authorized version. It's not a radical anything. It is a taking of various existing translations that were consulted, although the Bishop's Bible is the basis, and a making of that, out of them, one good translation, one principal good translation. Now, the translators of the Authorized version were very definite in their belief that any translation of the Bible is the Bible. That didn't mean that they could be careless. It meant that they had to be very, very careful to have the best translation. This is a reprint of 1611, but in Roman type, and we see in it it has some of the original woodcuts, the original illustrations. There we are. That's the original woodcut. The Holy Bible containing the Old Testament and the New, newly translated out the original tongues, and with the former translations diligently compared and revised. And it's designed, one of the great things of the Authorized version, it's designed to be read in churches. It's designed for reading out loud. So many modern Bible translations are designed for personal, private, silent reading. But the Authorized version, they very much said, well, this is to be read out loud. There's a rhythm to it. And when you read the Old Testament, it's a Hebrew rhythm. It's a rhythm that belongs to the original language. It's no accident that the professors of Greek and Hebrew in Oxford and Cambridge were among the translators. But also, which is even more amazing when you consider that in those days university teaching was all done in Latin, that it's such good English. So, Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. There is a simple majesty in the prose of the Authorized version. There are occasional places where it's quite apparent that the translators weren't at all sure what was being said in the original, and so they give a very, very literal translation. Particularly, there are a couple of sections in the book of Job that are like that, and it does us no good to pretend that they're not, but at the same time we have to say, well, if they said, well, we don't understand what's going on here, they said, well, we'll just provide as literal a translation as possible and let other people work it out later. But for the most part, we find that the language is majestic and glorious and clear, and it's English. It's English, it's not Latinate, it's not stuff taken from other languages. There's an awful phrase in the New English Bible, propagandists for foreign deities, which A, sounds very, very mid-20th century, it is, but also it's just not good English. It's a bit impenetrable in English, in modern English. The King James set us forth as strange gods, at least has the great benefit of being English and using the words strange and gods, which are quite understandable English words. And we don't need propagandists. The Gospel of John. John has this beautiful, beautiful style in the Greek. He says simple things. He says the most profound things in simple ways. So the Authorized version. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him. Without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Could anything be more majestic? Well, we at the Bethel, we of course use the New King James, which is a modern language revision of the Old King James, as light a revision as could be almost. So there are some issues with it. Americanisms, for example, it's an American translation. Capitalization of pronouns referring to deity, which is something the King James didn't do, and which has led the New King James to make some decisions about whether he is referring to God or not. But on the whole, it's a decent, modern, light updating. The majesty and the beauty of the King James is such that it remains, even for many who don't believe it, one of the greatest books in the English language. Well, thank you for watching, and may God bless you in your study of the best book of all, even God's own word. Amen.